Good morning. Welcome to today's subcommittee hearing entitled Improving Oversight of the Regulatory Process, Lessons from State Legislatures. This hearing provides an opportunity to do something Washington should do more often. Listen. Listen and try to learn to see what states do well, especially when it pertains to regulations. Today we have 3 states that have found effective ways for their legislatures to provide oversight over state rulemaking agencies. Strong and effective legislative oversight doesn't mean stopping agencies from issuing rules. And it does not mean we must have an adversarial relationship with regulators. When regulators do not trust or work with the legislature, they push the bounds of their authority. This leads to lawsuits challenging nearly every aspect of rulemaking, which draws out the process, creating uncertainty for individuals and our communities. On the other hand, as we will hear today, a cooperative relationship between agencies and the legislative body leads to more effective and efficient rules that follow legislative intent and incorporate the views of regulated parties. Regulators working closely with the legislature result in regulations that face far fewer lawsuits from stakeholders. The onus to improve the rulemaking process is not just on the regulators. As legislators, we must fulfill our responsibility to actually legislate. For decades, we've fallen into the habit of passing legislation that's vague on the details and tell the agencies to do the hard work and figure out how to be able to apply it. Politically, this insulates the legislature, and we can say that we did our part, but the agency messed up the implementation. It's not how government's supposed to work. Many states, like Connecticut, North Dakota, actively review state regulations to ensure they follow legislative intent. Other states, like Idaho, codify state regulations a year after they expire, or they expire. This causes the legislature to take responsibility for not only the bills they pass, but also for the regulations that are a direct result of those laws. When we talk about regulatory reform, I frequently hear assertions that changes to our system will result in the ossification of the rulemaking process, clog the courts, prevent agencies from issuing needed regulations, or create significant risk to health, safety, or the environment. But many of the ideas that we have considered in committee are already being used in success on the state level. And I think we can learn a lot today from this. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. With that, I would recognize the ranking member, Heidi Heitkamp, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Langford. So over the past 3 years, we've been leading this committee. We've spent a lot of time examining the regulatory process, from the basic framework of the rulemaking process to the doctrines that are applied in court to the nitty-gritty of how decisions are made on an agency level. From these examinations, legislators have legislation's flowed, trying to adopt different ideas that's been discussed in those hearings. What we have not done enough of is look beyond the process in Washington. This hearing is a great way to learn about the activities of our partners in governance, the states, to learn about how they've tackled many of the same questions that we've considered in this committee, and to basically let the laboratories, the 50 laboratories of government, work and inform some of the practices that we do right here. If anyone's been following this committee, they know that frequently I ask about the intersection between federal regulation and state regulation, because a lot of the challenges that we have here for over-regulation or duplicative regulation or inconsistent regulation is really that push between state and local regulation and federal regulation. And a lot of us believe that if the state is already protecting public health and safety, that that's the level at which those institutions are most accountable. And so we definitely want to hear not only your opinion about what you do, but maybe some of the frustration about the duplication that you see in regulatory effort with federal regulation. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, congratulations. It's a great opportunity for us to learn a lot more about how things could work better and how we could work better with state regulators.
That's great. Thank you. At this time, we'll proceed with testimony from our witnesses. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, Ranking Member Heitkamp, Chairman, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to testify. I'm a 27-year veteran of...
Representative O'Neill, I hate to apologize. Can you pull the mic a little bit closer to you?
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a 27-year veteran of the Legislative Regulation Review Committee of Connecticut and have previously served 6 years as co-chairman of the committee. The Connecticut General Assembly first began reviewing regulations in 1945. The Secretary of State was required to submit to each General Assembly all the regulations promulgated during the preceding biennium for its study, legislature meeting only biennially. Any regulation which the General Assembly disapproved was void and not reissued. In 1963, the first Regulations Review Committee was established by statute. This committee was and is a bicameral, bipartisan committee. It met during the interim between the sessions and could only disapprove regulations that were already in effect. Disapproval voided the regulation unless the General Assembly overrode the committee's action at its next session. But the General Assembly was not required to act on voided regulations. In 1971, the current Legislative Regulations Review Committee was created pursuant to the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act, which we adopted. Under the 1971 law, the committee was authorized to review proposed regulations. The committee's disapproval of a regulation in 1976 led to a lawsuit challenging the legislature's role on constitutional grounds, alleging a breach of the separation of powers principle. The Connecticut Superior Court ruled that the committee's activity was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court overturned that lower court decision, but they did so on technical grounds, leaving the issue of constitutionality unresolved until 1982, when a constitutional amendment approved by the electorate became effective and confirmed the legislature's authority to consider and disapprove administrative regulations. The Regulation Review Committee was established to ensure proper legislative review of proposed agency regulations. Administrative regulations have the force of law, therefore closer scrutiny and control of the legislative branch by the legislative branch is clearly in the public interest to ensure that regulations do not contravene legislative intent. The committee, which meets monthly, consists of 14 members, 6 senators and 8 House members. There are equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats. There are 2 co-chairs, a Republican and a Democrat, one from each chamber. Each term, the co-chairs alternate, so the senator becomes the member of the opposite party, and the House member does the same thing. This is a system of subcommittees which usually consist of 2 members, a Republican and a Democrat from each chamber. The subcommittees are assigned to specific agencies. The subcommittees review and, if necessary, make changes to the regulations. The regulations and other required documents are provided to each committee member at least 1 month prior to the meeting at which the action is to be taken. Legal opinions and recommendations from our legal staff and fiscal analysis from our fiscal staff are provided to us 10 days before such meeting. The committee can take the following types of action: approve in whole or in part, approve with technical corrections, reject without prejudice, or disapprove. Approval in part allows the committee to make deletions. When deletions are made, sections or subsections are deleted, not individual words. The committee cannot add words to a regulation. Technical changes are sometimes needed to correct spelling, punctuation, statutory references, and matters of style. Frequently, regulations are rejected without prejudice for a lack of statutory authority. Rejection without prejudice requires the agency to resubmit the regulation with appropriate corrections within either 35 or 65 days, depending on whether the regulation is mandatory or permissive. There is no limit to the number of times that a regulation can be rejected without prejudice. Disapproval is rare and signifies the committee's interpretation that the proposed regulation is without statutory basis. Disapproval requires the regulation to be sent to an appropriate committee of the legislature for consideration during the next legislative session. The General Assembly then has the option to sustain or reverse the Regulation Review Committee's action. Inaction by the legislature sustains the action of the committee. The committee meets as necessary to consider emergency regulations. The committee functions as intended. It is effective as a mechanism to protect the legislative intent from executive branch dilution or distortion. It provides an opportunity for individuals interested in or affected by a regulation to influence the process without the time and expense of litigation. The committee's bipartisan and bicameral structure enhances its effectiveness. Some agency staffers who must deal with the Regulations Review Committee do not want to deal with the committee and the additional process that we require. I consider that to be evidence of the effectiveness of the committee in defending the authority of the legislative branch, and I welcome your questions.